Now we're being recorded. So the purpose of the strategic communications campaign. So we have $1.75 million available in federal COVID-19 funding to contract services with community-based media or community-based organizations to do the following. Really, our goal is to create a communication strategy that reaches an audience of those who are most negatively impacted by the combined crises of systemic racism and COVID-19. And so please pay attention to the list of other audiences we would like here that are all in the bulleted points below. Certainly, this isn't all the audience that we'll reach, but this is where we are most focused on reaching these audiences. And really what this slide highlights is the fact that we're trying to reach this audience because we understand that racism, despite amazing community resiliency, is an underlying root cause of the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic on communities of color. And so for us as King County, it's essential that we're communicating about how we're spending our federal COVID-19 dollars to that audience that's most harmed by these two intersecting crises. And this audience is also important because King County made a commitment early on to be accountable to these communities about how we're spending these federal COVID-19 dollars, but also how we're applying our commitment of being an anti-racist and pro-equity government to this spending as well. So this slide here shows kind of the how that we want to do this. Essentially, what we would be doing is providing our community partners a baseline of information. And really the goal is to be able to increase awareness of, access to, and accountability of information about what King County calls our Revive and Thrive programmings. And this is everything that you're probably familiar with, but it's things like grants that we've put out there, contracts, support services to, community-based organizations, individuals, families, certain sectors. And so the visual here might be a little bit hard to read, but I just wanted to spend some time about kind of explaining what this is. And again, we're going to put these slides online, so you'll be able to go back and look more carefully. But this is a visual representation of how King County has already allocated more than $1 billion in our 2021 federal COVID-19 funding to the pandemic response. And so you'll see in the orange pie there, the top 5 spending categories are things like our eviction prevention and rental assistance programs that we stood up for the COVID vaccinations, obviously the public health response in general to COVID, de-intensifying our shelters because of the homelessness response that we've had to stand up, and our housing and employment programs. And in the red there, you'll see there's some funds and for contracting and grants. And you also might be familiar with some of these contracts and grants that are either open or recently closed and are now funding community-based organizations. And that's things like our Arts and Culture Supports Fund, Child Care Services, Equitable Economic Recovery Fund, again, services for homelessness and shelter support, and then grants and contracts through our Office of Equity and Social Justice. And as an example, that includes the $25 million that King County has allocated to our Racism as a Public Health Crisis initiative. And so what we're hoping is by providing a baseline of information, and this is not the only baseline of information we'll be providing, it'll be much more detailed than this, that you who are community partners can help us push this information out to the communities most in need. And besides just pushing information out, the goal of this campaign is to also create a feedback loop back to King County. So we've designed this program to not just reach the intended audience we want, but also creating that feedback loop. So that way we as a government can better improve our processes and understand how are these federal COVID-19 dollars being felt or impacting those on the ground in community. So I'm going to go over our program map. Again, might be a little bit hard to read, and we'll be posting these on the website so you can take a deeper dive. But this is just a visual of kind of how we imagine this program to work. So King County will provide a baseline of information to you, our community partners. And this will include a more complete picture of that pie chart I showed you earlier, but it'll essentially show you where all our federal COVID-19 funding has gone so far, specific data, numbers on the existing programs that we've had, that we've already funded, or maybe information on upcoming grant opportunities or upcoming programs that we're launching. And what we're hoping is that your organization, you might be interested in reporting on all of it, or you might be interested in a particular topic, and maybe you'd want to request more information from us, the county, so that way you can help us better tell these stories in community. So using that baseline of information, you would create a strategic communications campaign to ensure that the specific audiences we want to reach are receiving the best information about the allocation of our federal COVID-19 dollars thus far. The goal of this is to increase transparency and accountability in those communities, but also to provide community members information on, where they can access services, upcoming grants that are opening up that maybe they also want to apply to as well. And then finally, again, we talked about that feedback loop. So once your organization pushes out that communication, in order to increase transparency and accountability, we would want you to report back to us about what you heard from residents on the ground, community leaders, information that could help us better administer our federal dollars, programs, and services. And then a part of that will also be reported back to us some of the engagement numbers that you received on any communication materials that you pushed out. So I'm going to provide you two examples of kind of a real world example, like, what does all that mean? So as an example, this would be like for a media organization. So let's just say that we provide you information about a new grant that's opening in 2022, and it's a new program to keep school-aged children and their families in their homes. By the way, this is hypothetical. So we, as a baseline of information, will provide you data, numbers on our rental assistance program, and maybe this particular program about, how many children are we serving? How many families are we serving? Where do they live? How many months did they need this rental assistance for in order to keep them in their homes, during the school year? So you as a media organization, maybe you'd produce a series about all the rental assistance that King County has pushed out during the pandemic so far. Maybe there's a data journalism article about the types of housing units that were awarded rental assistance. Perhaps a second article could be a feature with on-the-ground reporting of families who received the rental assistance in 2021. And maybe you're checking back in with them 6 months later to say, hey, where are you at now? How did that help you? What did that feel like for you to receive that funding? And maybe you find that that it was super helpful, and maybe you also find that there was some issues with the programming that King County put out. That would be okay for us too. And the third article looks at the, maybe a new program that would impact school-aged children in BIPOC communities and their families. And you do like a multimedia storytelling where you include video interviews with the children themselves about what it means to be housed during the pandemic. And so the feedback loop is you as a media organization would push out these series, and then you'd report back to us, to King County, about what you heard on the ground that may not have been captured by all the stories that you particularly published. So for example, like maybe you found that residents in a particular community with language access needs may not have known about the rental assistance. That's something that we would want to know. That's part of the feedback loop so that we can improve our processes to more equitably administer a future assistance program, a rental assistance program. And then as part of the reporting aspect, potentially you'd also provide numbers about engagement, like how many people read the story, how many views did the article get, what's been the feedback on social media, for example. The second example that we gave is maybe for a community-based organization. So you're not necessarily a newsroom, but you are a trusted community messenger, and you maybe have existing communication channels. For example, you might have like a really robust newsletter that your community is engaged with, or you might have really strong social media channels that reaches a very particular community. And so in this example, perhaps we provide you information about the $8 million in federal grants that has been allocated by the Office of Equity and Social Justice at King County. And perhaps you as the community-based organization are interested in learning more about our $2 million in digital equity grants and kind of what's the impact on the ground? What did people get from that $2 million? And so for those that don't know, the digital equity grants are grants where community-based organizations receive funding, and maybe they're opening up computer labs, maybe they're opening up a program that's like renting laptops to students. They're helping with digital access needs and things like that. And so you as a community-based organization, maybe you reached out to those fellow CBOs and you say, hey, we want to kind of feature you in our newsletter. Go ahead and tell us what it was like to open up that computer lab in a particular community of color, for example. And then maybe you partner with them to produce a social media campaign to make more communities of color aware of the fact that there are these types of computer labs in South King County, for example. Again, helping the community access the information to know that these federal dollars are spent. Here are the resources that are available to you right now. And then the feedback loop is, again, you report back to us, like, what did you hear from that social media campaign? Perhaps you talked to the CBO and it turned out that, hey, they got more students that following week than they expected. Or, hey, we just, here were the number of views that we got on that social media campaign. So it's just showing that that information is being pushed out there in a good way. So I hope those were some helpful examples. We can certainly spend more time talking about kind of that whole process with you in the Q&A. But for now, we're going to go over a little bit more of the technical aspects of the grant program. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan to walk us through this.
Thank you. So we do have a pretty big list of organizations that may be eligible, but I also want to say that we are not totally comprehensive. So if you don't see your organization on this list, feel free to reach out. We are really looking for community-based organizations that will be able to reach the most impacted communities in the King County area. So one of the things that we missed on this list is television stations. Please, we are not, this is not totally comprehensive, like I said, so please, if you're not totally sure, we are happy to answer any questions that may come up. But again, if you are an artist or creator, community-based organization, communications firm, we're really looking for folks with deep ties in community who are trusted messengers who will be able to get the information out in ways that we haven't really been able to see. So important things, this is a federally funded campaign. So we do need to have, or you need to have either legal status as a business, a 501c, so that can include 501c3s, 501c4s. You do not have to be a nonprofit to qualify for this grant, but if you don't have any of those things, you will need a fiscal sponsor. If you are receiving federal funds for a similar campaign, there is a high likelihood that you will not be eligible for these specific grants. It does not, if you are receiving federal funds in general, it does not mean that you are ineligible for these grants. It just makes it a little bit more tricky. The federal government does have a policy called do not allow duplication of benefits, and we will include some more guidance on that on the website. But if you are receiving grants for this specific work, you will not be eligible for the funds. If it is for a totally different population, there's potential. If it's totally different work, you probably don't have to worry about that. But again, we'll have more information on the website for you to look at. And if you're curious, it is the duplication of benefits policy. So if you Google that, you'll get more information. And again, because it is a federal grant, we do have to track and monitor pretty closely. So you will have to show that you are able to administer and manage these grants. It is a reimbursement process, so you will have to show invoices and receipts and all of that. And this is also not a comprehensive list. So the funds you can use them for work that you are currently doing, an expansion of that work, including hiring consultants or staff people to be able to take on some more of the work that you would be doing with King County. But we're not trying to really box you in. So if there is work that you are wanting to build on, we are interested in potentially funding that work. So the grants are going to be up to $150,000. We don't have a minimum, but it will really depend on the work that you're doing and whether it fits into the scope of work that we're looking at. Maximum of $150,000. We are hoping to be able to make this a multi-year contract, but because we're in a budget year, we do have to cut them off at the end of 2022. We will have more information later this year, and we'll be in close contact with you to let you know the status of that plan. We are working with our budget office and council to make sure that this process will continue into 2023. So that means for you that you'll want to write a budget for both your budget ending in the end of 2022 or extending into 2023, a second part if you're planning to do that. And it is the same pot of money. It'll just extend into 2023. And when we're reviewing grant applications, we will be looking at these 4 areas. So organizational history and values alignment, audience and communication strategy, timeline and deliverables, budget and operations operations elements. So as you can see here, there are various questions within that we are asking ourselves and asking you. And then in the grant application, there also are even more specific questions that align to these various areas. So one thing to note in the grant application is that there are several questions with multi-parts. Please make sure that you answer all of the parts because they will be evaluated separately. And I got a question or several questions previously. There is no word limit or character count limit, but we do want to make sure that you're aware that there are real people reading these grant applications. So please, if you can be concise in your answers, we or I really think that bullet points are great. And we want you to be able to express what you're doing without the limits, because that can be really frustrating, but please don't write us a novel. So we are using eCivis to manage the grants. The grant application is available now. The deadline is Monday, March 7th at 5 p.m. And this link is available at the website that I posted in the chat. And if the language or the application is currently available in English, Spanish, and Amharic. But if you need another language, please let us know as soon as you can. It does take a little bit of time for us to get that turned around. So please let us know as soon as you can if you need it in another language. So just to quickly go over the grant timeline, the application is open now. It will be closing on Monday, March 7th at 5 p.m. We should be letting you know by late March or early April if you are receiving a contract. And then we will be moving into contract in April with the implementation timeline, April 2022. to the end of December 2022, unless we get word that we're able to extend into 2023. Funds will be dispersed in a reimbursement process. They will be processed either monthly or quarterly, depending on how you would like to do that. And you are responsible for meeting 2 CFR 200 guidelines. So please make sure that you're aware of that. If you do need an advance payment, please make sure that you include that in your grant application, or information that would signal that, because we do need to do that prior to signing contracts. I just saw a question in the chat. The deadline is March 7th at 5 p.m.
Thank you, Megan. So we breezed through that, but we do want to leave a lot of time for questions. Again, there is the Q&A function on the menu bar where you can ask a question. Please use that instead of the chat so you can better keep track of the questions that you may have, and we can answer them. We had quite a few questions during our last informational session, and so I would also encourage you to maybe go look at that one, because there may have been questions that were asked there that you also have. But again, we have plenty of time for you to ask questions. Great. Can you provide the web address for the application? Megan, I'll have you drop that in the chat.
Yes, I will do that now.
Thank you.
Oh, I did forget to mention one thing in that section. There is a multi-page RFA that has all of the King County requirements, all of the criteria that we'll be looking at, and the process. So please make sure that you look at that as well. That'll be on the webpage that I put in the link or put in the chat.
Great, thank you, Megan. Would a consultant be able to apply and provide services for this cohort of grantees for content promotion and research? I'm gonna tap in my colleague Aaron here. I believe the grant is open to consultants, but again, our most important thing is making sure that you're able to reach specific communities that we had listed earlier in the presentation. It sounds like, you know, certainly content promotion and research is important, but as long as you're then using that content to reach those specific audiences, I think that's what's most important to us.
Yeah, I think how I would answer it is that if a community media outlet or communications outlet wants to hire a consultant through this grant, through this contract opportunity to do that body of work, like content promotion and research, and then they use the work that a consultant is doing to then share it out through however way they communicate, I think that would work. Like that entity can do that. I'm unclear in terms of just the consultant to do promotion and research without having the network in community where that information goes.
Thank you, Aaron. Sian, I hope that helped answer your question. When we provide our contact information, please feel free to email us and we can have a better conversation with you individually about your specific idea. Gavin asks, is this project specifically only for the reporting of past COVID relief projects, or can this fund programs for youth as a response to COVID inequities? So this program is a contract to, you know, report or have strategic communications on all the COVID relief spending that the county has done so far are federal dollars. And so that is partly in the past, but is also still happening. So as an example, the county's federal COVID-19 dollars are still, there are still grants being open. There are still programs that are being stood up. So in that sense, it's past and future as well over the next 2 years. Your second question seems a little bit different in that, can this fund programs for youth as a response to COVID inequities? I don't think the intent of this particular grant program is to fund youth projects. We're really trying to fund existing community-based organizations and community-based media outlets that already have those strong connections in community and are trusted messengers. If, for example, I know for a fact that there's a youth-led media outlet in King County that I believe reaches South King County and some of the audiences that we would like to reach. If they applied for this funding and they wanted to fulfill this contract, and their organization had all of the needed employer status and some of the things we need, like being able to do the accounting and the tracking and stuff, then potentially they'd be able to apply. So Gavin, I hope that answers your question. Again, feel free to email us and we can discuss further. Megan, can you answer Carlos's question?
Yes, I was actually just trying to find the answer to that question. I don't think that we have a specific amount right now. I will add that information to the FAQ when I have it, but we don't have specific guidance from our finance department.
Thank you. Chris asked, does the county need to approve advertisements, flyers before we publish them, or does the county already have pre-approved artwork for producing items like this? I don't think we need to approve advertisements and flyers ahead of time. You are the trusted community messengers, and so that would be part of your contract. As far as pre-approved artwork, certainly the county has like Revive and Thrive branding. For every grant or program out there, they might have their own branding that would be available to use potentially. So for example, like our Arts and Culture Fund kind of has a look and a branding to it, right? And so we would be able to provide that artwork to help you produce items. Carlos, you asked a really good question. Is the panel making the decision reflect the community? So the panel that is making the decision on the funding is made up of King County staff. We are a diverse staff, but the majority of us are either in the Office of Equity and Social Justice or have worked with media outlets before, have a communication background, or have a background serving and working with community-based organizations. And that was really important to us. So that way the panel understands kind of the landscape of the players out there already, but also like the capacity of those organizations and who they reach. So again, our most important thing is just making sure that we're reaching particular audiences. And so the panel we're hopeful we'll have some familiarity with those who are applying and can say, oh yes, like we absolutely know that this media outlet is a trusted messenger for this particular community. They have a strong standing as a community leader. And so, we're hopeful that that perspective informs our decision-making. Is there a specific requirement of how many people we reach or how many campaigns and communications we administer? There aren't right now. Certainly during the contracting part of the feedback loop is to just get some sense of, for example, like how many people are you reaching? If you have those numbers, that's not necessarily a requirement. So, we know that, for example, like if you send out a newsletter, you're able to tell us how many you sent it to and what the open rate was, for example, right? But if you I don't know, if you created some sort of artwork that's a physical presence, like you might not be able to tell us like how many people actually saw it. We understand that. So there'll be some reporting for that, but not for every project. It's just going to depend. And then as far as how many campaigns and communications you administer, again, I think that's going to depend on the type of communication you do. So, if your only channel is a newsletter, for example, and you are sending that newsletter once a month, then, we're going to know there's potentially 8 newsletters that are being put out for the rest of this year. But if you're doing a social media campaign and you're doing, 10 posts a week or something, we know that might look different. And the amount of campaigns you can fit in that social media channel is going to be different than the newsletter, as an example. So I hope that helps answer your question. Hi, Somali Bridge. So you asked, so this is a campaign to report on communities through organizations that received COVID grants. So this is a campaign to report to communities most impacted by COVID-19 and racism about specifically King County's allocation of its federal COVID-19 dollars. And so as I showed you on that screen earlier, oh, hello. I'll just continue in case anyone has any questions. On that screen earlier, certainly some of that funding has gone to community-based organizations, those grants have, and so there'd be some reporting there, but maybe some of that other funding went directly towards like public health, for example, or to different agencies to stand up services.
Stephanie, can I add to that?
Sure, yes, please do.
So for example, the county has deployed a lot of resources for vaccines and testing, as an example, right? So the work around this is really being able to get some stories of impact on the ground about, well, how did it impact, for example, the Somali community, right? So that we have a clear understanding about whether or not the Somali communities that you're working with actually know the information about vaccine and testing, and B, what's the impact on the ground, right? To be able to create that communication loop so that we have a better sense of whether we're reaching the communities we most want to support through the federal funding.
Thank you, Arun, for that clarity. Amir, I mean, we are open, certainly would love to work with community-based organizations, and they could be a nonprofit or a for-profit firm. Yeah, if it's a for-profit firm that works with CBOs to do this work, I think that's also okay. Arun and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong. We would just want you to explain in your application, like who are the CBOs that you do work with, and then therefore what are the audiences that you reach.
Yeah, so if you're a for-profit like consultation firm, where your specialty is communications, a wide range of communication services, and you're contracted with particular community-based organization, and that's the service that you deliver, then that would be in alignment with this, as long as what Stephanie is talking about, like who are the community-based organizations you're contracted with, what's their audience, those details about the programmatic impact.
And check the chat in case someone. No. Looks like we answered some of those questions. So folks, we still have a lot of time left if you have any additional questions. If there are none, I think we'll stay on for a couple more minutes just to make sure. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and share our contact information with you. Just a second. So again, this is our team. Our email is oesjgrants@kingcounty.gov. We will answer any questions that you have, or if you need any assistance about the application itself. So please utilize that. Again, this is the three of us, and we will be manning that box. So write that down if you can. Sion asks, are you leaning toward prioritizing organic distribution of content versus paid promotion to reach people who are not connected with CBOs? And are promotion budgets included in the overall cap for funding? That's a good question. Certainly organic distribution of content is important to us because that is, a trusted relationship in terms of, a person has signed up to follow that social media channel or go to that website regularly if they're a media outlet. But I think we are certainly open, and it did say one of the eligible uses of funds was for paid promotion. As long as you're showing that it is reaching one of the particular audiences that we want to reach. And yes, promotion budgets are included in the overall cap for funding. Sion, if you have experience with promotional budgets and have concerns about that overall cap for funding, please reach out to us and let us know, because I would be curious about that. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Aaron or Megan, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, with the paid promotion, I think what we would want to sort of work through is to what extent that paid promotion actually results in the relationship of understanding the user's impact of the funds, right? So it's not a one directional of we're promoting this content, but we're also wanting to learn and build that relationship with the community. So, the extent to which a paid promotion would be designed to yield that feedback loop, I think those are the things that we'd want to explore.
Thank you, Aaron. And you just sparked an idea in my head, which is, certainly when the county is thinking about all the grants that we're putting out there, typically we do the same thing, right? Like we create a little flyer, we create an ad, and we place it in, community-based media outlets so that we were reaching the audience that we want to apply for that type of funding. So that's some of the work that we're already doing, but the way that we design this program is to use trusted existing communication channels to better reach those communities, because certainly if we're just spending advertising dollars, to Aaron's point, we're not necessarily truly understanding if they are receiving the message, what information they're receiving, and then having a feedback loop back to us. We're just kind of like pushing out content. And so that was certainly not our intent of this program. Chris asked, what is the delivery date for final billing? Megan, I'll have you answer that one.
Yeah, so the implementation timeline is through the end of December. So it's unlikely that you'll have all of the bills ready by then. So it will likely be sometime in January. We'll have more specific information with, or if you do get, or once we have the final proposals in.
So if there are no more questions, we'll likely wrap this up a little bit early. Again, please take down our contact information that's on the screen, and you can reach out to us individually if you want to have a conversation about this and your particular organization or your idea. This webinar will be posted online at kingcounty.gov, and I'll be sending up a follow-up email to every participant with the slides and the video and some additional links to the application on the website and such. Thank you all for your time. Again, we really appreciate your interest. And if that is it, I think we'll close out. Thank you, everyone.